Aputure is back in the innovation game with the Accent b7c. When I first saw this light, I was, well, unimpressed. Yes, it's innovative, if by that you mean that Aputure has created a new variant on an existing idea. That's how most innovation works. But for a light designed for on-set practicals, how practical is it? And at $70, is there a cheaper alternative among those existing ideas? Now, there's no doubt that Aputure has created a high-quality product with a ton of features. There's really no cheaper match in terms of light quality and flexibility. But high quality and Swiss Army knife functionality isn't actually the same thing as practicality. I mean, no one uses the little scissors on their Swiss Army knife. It's not practical. But more importantly, you really can't tell the difference between a scene shot on an $1,800 Satchler tripod versus a $200 Davis & Sanford. So let's see what we can save in terms of some money here. There's a ninefold difference between the cost of those two tripods. What can we match the Aputure Accent b7c against for, say, $8? The Accent is a Bluetooth-controlled RGB WW light with a built-in battery for roughly an hour of life unplugged and unlimited life when in a working socket. Like all of Aputure's products, it has exceptional light quality and a great set of features that includes programmable presets to replicate things like fireplaces and TVs. And, I'll be honest, I have great respect for Aputure products. But let's look at the $8 Neporal emergency lights. Let's go ahead and hit the groovy B-roll for a proper intro. Now, like the Aputure, emergency light bulbs have built-in batteries, but they only come in one color temperature. This here is a daylight bulb that's actually about 6,000 Kelvin, so it's a cloudy day. But you can also get them at 2,700 Kelvin. It doesn't have Bluetooth because there's really nothing to control. It doesn't even have a power switch. It'll light up automatically in a dead socket, and it will also light up with this special cap that comes with it. Now, you can turn it on also with your fingers, but I find that to be a little bit finicky, and you have to keep holding it. Now, it's big for a light bulb, which means it's not going to fit in every light well and under every type of clip-on shade. The Aputure is also bigger too, so they share that problem to a certain extent. The Aputure is a 7-watt LED, 50-watt equivalent light bulb. The Neporal is a 15-watt LED, making it an 80-watt equivalent light bulb. So in terms of pure wattage, the $8 Neporal outperforms the $70 Aputure. Now, the Neporal is somewhat directional, making it look a little dimmer from different angles. The light comes more from the top than from the sides or the back, which is different, of course, than a traditional light bulb. The Aputure has the same issue too, though to a lesser extent. I was disappointed to discover that it's only 80 watts when powered by a lamp. On battery, it's really only just about 40 watts here. Now, the Aputure is dimmable, but like most other LED bulbs, the Neporal is not. The only level adjustments is 100% on electricity and 50% on battery. And the Aputure is RGB for a full range of colors, whereas the Neporal can only be colored with the gels. These are huge advantages for the Aputure. Now, the app for the Aputure really does everything but make you a chicken sandwich. You can dial in any color you want and any color temperature. You can group your bulbs and program basic changes, and even match other light colors that aren't in the Aputure ecosystem. They really thought about everything, and there's no cheapo system that can match that. It's convenient, but you may not use many of those deep functions very often. Both bulbs have their LED bits encased in plastic. Now, the Neporal plastic doesn't really feel very sturdy, but it's not fragile like glass either. You can bump it and probably drop it from a couple of feet and it won't break. And if it does, well, that's $8. So even though the Aputure is much better built, the Neporal kind of slips ahead because you'd have to drop it like 9 times or break it 9 times to get the same financial damage. Both lights are flicker-free up to 120 FPS and beyond. The Aputure has roughly an hour of battery life, whereas the Neporal has 3 to 5 hours of battery life at full brightness, which is a tad dimmer than the Aputure. The Aputure charges more quickly in about 2 hours, whereas the Neporal takes a whopping 6 hours to get charged. That's 3 times as long, though of course you have 3 times as much battery life, so the difference really kind of washes itself out. The batteries themselves are similar in size. The Neporal has a 1200 mAh battery and the Aputure has a 1300 mAh, which makes me realize just how much we're overcharged for batteries in our profession. Both of these lights charge while in a light socket, which is, let's face it, a stupid-ass choice. Now, on top of your USB-C charger and your USB-A charger and your Sony MPF charger and your AA battery charger, you have to have a light socket to charge all of your gear? Now, the Neporal is intended to be an emergency light bulb, so I can see why it was designed this way. You're supposed to just leave it in the socket, and then it turns on when the lights go out. But the Aputure? Yeah. For 70 bucks, give me a USB port, please. It's the only real design failure in the Aputure. Of course, maybe they could throw in a bottom cap that has a 1/4 inch thread so you can mount it on something, anything. So that's 2 design flaws. The Aputure has a CRI of 95+. The Neporal CRI is unknown, but most non-video lights have a CRI closer to 85. The result is that the colors are less vibrant and may have a green or a magenta hue. But in this specific situation, I have to ask, does CRI really matter that much? I mean, this isn't meant to be a key light. It's not bright enough or soft enough, and it's not designed to go into a light modifier. It's supposed to be an accent or a fill light. It's not designed to light a face or even a space. So if the colors are a little bit muted, is that a serious offense? But for the sake of argument, let's say that you do want to use it as your key light. You're shooting your film using only practicals for that gritty, realistic look, and so you want a full spectrum light without any ungodly hues. How does the Neporal fare? Well, the results are better than I expected, but there is slightly more green in the light, and on skin you may notice it. Here's what the Aputure M9 looks like for comparison. Like the Accent, it has a 95+ CRI rating. The M9 looks a little cleaner, richer, though actually there's a little too much blue according to my color checker. But that's more natural looking than green. Green, though, is easy to correct in post. There's no green in our skin, so adjusting it doesn't muck with any of our actual skin tones. If I remove the tint from the Neporal using a one-click auto white balance in DaVinci Resolve, the Aputure is slightly more vibrant, but you can only see that if you're looking for the difference. So let's go back to the purpose or function of this light. Now, the reason I bought these bulbs actually had nothing to do with finding a cheap alternative to the Aputure. It was for a shoot. The final scene was going to be of a dancer in a dressing room. Now, in green rooms or dressing rooms, light bulbs are fixed just above the mirror in a line. And in the film, we'd see the actress facing the mirror with the light bulbs visible for the establishing shot, and then reverse to shoot her from the front. Now, to do that in a real dressing room, you have to push her back from the mirror so you can get your camera in front. And then you really want the bulbs to be about the same distance from her face for consistency. So having the bulbs be battery powered meant that I could literally just have a grip hold the 2 bulbs on either side of the camera at the proper height. It was a super simple way to shoot that scene. Now, in the past, I've also brought my own light bulbs to a shoot when I needed indoor lamps to match the outside light coming in through a window. That's another reason to use the light bulb. And of course, there are on-set practicals. Typically, those are going to be daylight or tungsten, though I prefer to have my warm tungsten practicals be a little less orange, something closer to about 4000 Kelvin. You may also want your practicals to have a different color for a stylistic effect. So those are my reasons for choosing a light bulb for a light. With this in mind, the Neporals are okay. But the bottom line is that it can't do some of the important functions that I like. Its main shortcoming is that I can't dim it in any fixture. I have to create the rest of my light design around either 80 or 40 watts. The next biggest shortcoming is that you can't change the color without an old-fashioned gel. But it is brighter in the socket and the battery lasts 3 times as long, so are some things that really the $70 Aputure can't do either. I'd say it's about a 40% solution. And for some shoots, that may be the right answer that you're looking for. But I started to wonder if there was another cheap option that could fill the deficiency gap with the Neporal. Meet the Metathawan. Metathawan. Is that a name or an acronym? I don't know. It's a Chinese-made RGB light. Now, that was a disaster. The Metathawan were hugely disappointing due to flicker. They offered just 12 colors via remote control, and 7 of those flickered at 50 FPS. They weren't completely useless, but they fell far short of what is needed. So then I ordered the Govee Bluetooth RGB light bulb, and here we get into some important distinctions. You want a Bluetooth connection because you don't want to rely on Wi-Fi in the field, and you want an RGB bulb to get the full range of color temperature and hue. While the Matata one offered just 12 colors, the Govee gives you the full spectrum via an app. They cost slightly more at $14 a pop, $28 when purchased in a 2-pack. So how did the Govee perform? Like the Neporal, they're made of a plastic that isn't too robust, but it's not fragile either. They run the full range of color temperature from about 3000 Kelvin to 6000 Kelvin. The hitch here is that the color temperature is on a slider that doesn't have markings for Kelvin. So you're either guessing the temperature or you're using a separate app to measure it. I already have the excellent and free Evo Light Spectrum Pro app on my phone, but it is one more step you have to perform if you want more accuracy. It's a 7-watt LED, 60-watt equivalent bulb, so ever so slightly more powerful than the Aputure on paper. It's also fully dimmable in 1% increments, though with the thumb slider it's hard to be that precise. In my tests, none of the colors produced flicker at 250 FPS, which is outstanding. The biggest difference and shortcoming when compared to the Aputure is that it's not battery operated. It has to be in a working socket or powered by a portable battery system. Battery power isn't something that you'll need the majority of the time, but it's truly comforting to know that it's there. Now, there are 8 programmable scenes in this bulb, but they're absolutely useless from a cinematography standpoint, unless you're shooting a tacky house party. But you can turn the light off and on from the app, which is surprisingly convenient, especially for things like setting levels amongst multiple instruments. The app is supposed to be able to gang multiple bulbs together, but I haven't tried this function. The remaining question is color quality. The Neporal's skewed greenish and the Aputure towards amber. Well, the Govee does surprisingly well. In fact, I may prefer the color rendition of the Govee above the other two. There's less blue in the light, which skews the colors towards yellow, but the difference is both slight and easily corrected in post. And while I don't have a scientific tool to measure this, the light doesn't feel muted. I'm sorry that I'm not wearing the same outfit here, but I think you get the idea. Here you have the Govee against the other two. Now remember, this bulb isn't meant to be a key light, so it shouldn't be the main illumination on your skin. But from a quality standpoint, it could be. So, what's it good for? Well, it's really designed to replace a practical bulb in a working socket. It has the full spectrum of color and temperature, and it's fully dimmable, so you can mood light to your heart's content. With the adjustable color temperature, you can also add it into your daylight system if you need more daylight practicals. In all of these areas, the Govee is exceptional, but it does lack a battery, which is too bad, because it's nice to be able to just move a lamp without having to worry about plugging it back in. That's exceptionally helpful on set. And if it was battery operated, you could toss it behind an object if you wanted an accent light. Though, again, the bulb isn't a great form factor for that because it's directional, but it doesn't stand on its own or fit into a stand, so it's kind of hard to direct. A small flat light will fit in smaller spaces and be easier to mount. Of course, you can buy portable batteries with AC outlets if you really need that flexibility. If you combine one $14 Govee bulb with one $8 emergency bulb, you've got a capable basic system that isn't as good as the Aputure, but can do about 80% of the same work. Without a battery, the Govee, the pair is maybe 2/3 of the functionality of the Aputure, but you get twice as many bulbs, 3 times the battery life in daylight mode, and nearly 3 times more light overall. 140 watts versus 50 watts. At 1/3 of the cost. And you can get much of that functionality back if you're willing to give up some convenience. A handful of gels will give you the color flexibility with the battery-powered Neporal. It takes a minute to set up, but they do take up 0 space in your bag. And with any light, there's always a trade-off. We all want the perfect instrument, but that just isn't possible. The Aputure isn't as powerful as I'd like it to be, nor does it last as long. The charging is less than brilliant. There's no stand adapter, and like the cheap options, it doesn't emit the same amount of light from the top, sides, and bottom. And we know that the bulb isn't the handiest form of light outside of a lamp socket. The accent may be best in class, but it's not without compromises. And here's an important question. Will one Aputure bulb really be enough? You can do a lot with it, but what if you want 2 practicals in the shot, or there are 2 light fixtures on the wall? All of the advantages, the jack-of-all-trade versatility doesn't mean much if you need 1 more bulb than you have in your kit. Owning just 1 Aputure bulb may be a bigger limitation than any of the cheapo problems combined, defining how you design your lights rather than freeing you up to be creative. Now, if money was no issue, it would clearly be better to have 4 Aputure lights rather than any cheapo cobbled together collection of bulbs. But that'll cost you about $300. And since the light bulb form isn't the most versatile, it's a lot of cash for flexibility you may rarely use. Not to mention you've only got 200 watts of light for $300. Now, the big advantage of the Accent is convenience. You got every kind of 50-watt bulb in one unit, and you've got a battery that unhooks you from light sockets. It's a multi-tool, and for larger production companies, it may offer a great value. But as a small company, unless I know that I'm regularly going to be using 4 bulbs on set, because that's what I've been doing every week for the past year, I think I'd rather deal with the limitations of the cheapo system that force me to make choices and also come with advantages in cost and light output. Pop this $45 solution in a case and you're ready to light the practicals of just about any room. All the practicals in the room. And before the flaming begins in the comments section below, let's rewind a moment. Is that the $8 Neporal, or the $50 Aputure, or the $14 Govee?